Hey everyone, welcome. It's Monday night again, 8 o'clock. It's good to see you here. Let me do a little bit of fiddling just whilst you folks are joining so I can see. There you go, back to the proper screen again. And you'll notice it's not just me again. So last week we had the wonderful, lovely Richard Barrett, who I'm pretty sure spent at least a small part of the hour abusing me and abusing my hair, but no such abuse this week, people, because we've got the lovely Caroline Ferguson. Hello, Caroline.
Hello, Richard. Your hair looks magnificent today.
Does it? Good. That was the right thing to say. You have no idea how much I pay Caroline to say that.
And it looks particularly magnificent against your amazing piece of artwork that you've got behind you.
You like it, right? A new piece of artwork, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's worthy of a Facebook Live in its own right, I think.
Definitely.
So we're going to talk to Caroline properly in a minute. It's good to have you here. Thanks for joining. Let me just at least refresh the page on my iPad so I can see if anybody asks any questions. And I can't see the page on the iPad at all. So let's hope that in just a second it all appears. It's going to appear, isn't it? As if by magic. If by magic. There it is. Okay, we're all good. I can see it. So we're kind of in the autumn groove. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling the whole autumn vibe.
Yeah,
particularly by the colours. I noticed just I took the pooch out for a walk, and the colours are extraordinary. So the colours kind of like wallop me and go, it's autumn. But also that we've got the heating on. The heating had to go on. If Kelly had had her way, she'd have had the heating on in July. I think there were probably 3 nights in the year so far where she hasn't had the electric blanket on. So that's on just a little bit higher, and the heating is on. So if your heating's on, give me a big yes. If you are resisting and fighting it and just doing things like hot water bottles and blankets, give me a big no. I want to know who's heating on. You've only got your heating on.
Yep, heating's on.
Yes.
And actually, this is birthday month for Kelly and I. Our birthdays are 1 day apart, so this is our month. This is it.
In October?
Yeah.
Kelly's birthday's in March.
Oh no, it's Kelly Teasdale's October, isn't it?
Oh, it's the other Kelly.
Other Kelly.
Oh, don't muddle them up.
I got my Kellys muddled.
They are both Kelly T though as well.
They are both Kelly T, yeah.
But I'm only married to one of them.
I'm glad to know.
Which is good for everyone. So who we got on? We've got Kelly, we've got Bethan. Bethan's liking the artwork. Bethan, oh, she's resisting the heating. She's wearing a jumper.
Oh, well done, Bethan.
And my mother-in-law says yes, all of them. I've got absolutely no idea what that means. Yes, all of what? I'm assuming that means all the heating, all the electric blankets, hot water bottles, all kinds of jazz. So look, anyway, here we are, Monday again, another weekend zoomed by, and yet another weekend where I shed a tear at the X Factor, which can only mean one thing: I am sensitive. Which I am a sensitive soul, actually, and I do often shed a tear at the X Factor. This series, it feels like it's been because it's so bad.
Oh dear.
Because the acts are so bad.
Yeah.
But I do shed a tear. I like seeing people be successful. I like people kind of pushing through their boundaries and invented limitations. So I get quite moved by that. So look, tonight we're talking about superpowers, and we're not talking about the superpowers that we think of automatically, like kind of super strength or being able to fly or wearing an invisibility cloak or kind of being a mental gymnast. We're not talking about that kind of superpower. We're talking about a superpower that lots of you won't even think is a superpower, which is sensitivity. Now, I am fascinated by this one, and I'm absolutely intrigued. And I know that you have a wonderful story and wonderful insight, Caroline, and are going to blow our minds with how sensitivity and superpower, how can we even put them in the same sentence? That's what I want to know. But you're going to tell us all of that. So it's great to have you here. We've got a load of questions, folks. If you want to ask questions whilst we're live, chuck them in the feed. I'll pick them up. If I don't pick them up, just do it all in capitals, so I know that you're starting to get a bit shouty. And I'll keep checking every so often and just fire them over. So Caroline, by way of, I guess, a bit of an introduction, I know you're a mindset trainer now. I know that hasn't always been your world and your life. So tell us a little bit about what you did before and what it is that led you to kind of this discovery and what you're specializing in today.
Well, I have worn many hats, Richard, many hats. And that is partly because, I'll tell you a little bit more about this later on, but partly because I'm a sensitive upstart. And sensitive upstarts, we have serial fascination. So we tend to kind of move on to these deep, passionate interests in things. And then we've done that and we move on to the next deep, passionate interests. And it's not to be confused with chasing shiny things or chasing squirrels. It's genuinely how we're wired. So that's, we'll just kind of park that idea of the sensitive upstart. But because I am one of those, I have done lots of different things. I've worn lots of hats. But one of the things that's been constant is that I'm a writer at heart. Cut me and I bleed words. So whatever I've done to earn a living has at some point or other has included words. And one of the main threads is that I've been this freelance communications consultant for businesses who are trying to communicate with their employees through change, through business transformation programs. And I go in there and work on a project with a leadership team. And that's something that I do every so often. And it really kind of brings the mindset side in, brings the words in, and sort of joins up quite a lot of the things I do. So that's been one of the constants. But all the way through it, there's just been this nagging feeling. I don't know if you've ever had it, but this nagging feeling that I was born for something more. There's got to be something more than this. There's a piece missing. And I never really knew what that was. And to be honest, I probably didn't delve too deeply into that. I just thought I would have to go off and do something creative and that would sort it out. And even though I did do lots of creative things, I was a screenwriter for 10 years, it just didn't quite scratch that itch. And it wasn't until I hit a really big birthday and I was working with a corporate client and it was all beginning to feel a bit like Groundhog Day. I just suddenly thought, right, I've got to deal with this. This is one of those big birthdays. I really need to work out what the second half is going to look like. And I realized at that point that I had to address this thing, this something more that I'd always wanted to do. And I realized that what that something more was impact. I wanted to make a bigger impact for good on other people's lives, on mine and other people's. And once I realized that, it set me off in the right direction. And within about 3 months, I'd started retraining as a cognitive behavioral hypnotherapist. And as soon as I did that, I realized that that was true north for me. That, you know, I just couldn't believe that people didn't know about this, what I was learning. Why aren't we taught this in school? You know, we're taught how to learn, but we're never taught how to think. And learning how to think in this healthy and flexible and resilient way was just the most important thing I think that's ever happened to me. And I realized really early on in the training that I was going to make a rubbish therapist. You know, there were going to be people who would be much better than me at working with severely anxious or depressed people. I realized that what I wanted to do was to work with what I would call normally effed up people, but people with massive potential who just weren't doing that thing, who weren't being the more that I knew that I could be. So that is really what I started doing. I became a mindset trainer, and I am a trainer. I don't call myself a coach because I have a methodology, I have a process that I teach people, and that's what I do. And I now work with amazing people who feel a little bit stuck because they've got limiting stories, they've got emotions that are getting in the way, and I help them to deal with those, to learn this healthy and flexible way of thinking so that they can then identify who they want to be and go off and do it. So I just feel amazingly privileged to be able to do that. And really, I am making it up as I go along, but with a good solid foundation of the cognitive behavioral training to really, support that.
Yeah, I love that. It's okay to say fucked up on here.
Okay. Normally fucked up people then. Yeah, normally fucked up people with extraordinary potential.
I'm very happy that our guests swear as much as they like. And so, yeah, and I really want to ask loads of questions about being a screenwriter, but of course that's not the topic, but I'm still curious. Do you write
another conversation?
Big films?
Well, sort of, in that I've never had one made. I've had loads of options sold, but I've never actually had one appear on screen, which is why after 10 years I thought, right, I have to do something else. Although I did throw a screenplay at a screenwriting competition about 6 months ago, and I got through to the final. So there's still a little bit of that, I can't quite let go of it. Yeah.
Okay, so look, I want to ask loads of questions about HSPs, about highly sensitive people. Tell us a bit more about it. Tell us a bit more about what some of the traits are within it, because I know there's loads of people will be sitting watching going, am I one? Am I a highly sensitive person? So I'm already starting to think that I am, but maybe you're going to
well, there's a self-test you can go on to. You know, the person who created this term in the mid to late 60s, Elaine Aron, she's kind of the goddess of this. She's a clinical psychological researcher. I think she was at Stanford or Harvard, anyway, one of the big ones. And she started looking into this in the mid to late 90s and started doing some serious research into it. And she was the one that coined the term highly sensitive person. HSP, and she established what the characteristics are, and there's been so much research done since then which bears it out. Basically, a highly sensitive person is essentially somebody who processes sensory information at a deeper level, at a more intense level than the majority of the population. And it's about 15 to 20% of people. It is a genetic characteristic, so they have identified specific genes and short alleles. I mean, there's a great lot of technical description I could go into, but I won't bore you with that. But it is definitely a genetic trait that applies to about 15 to 20% of the population. And they've identified high sensitivity as a characteristic in over 100 different animal populations, including the one we always trot out is including fruit flies. I'm going to have to find a different example, actually, because everyone uses that.
I love that. Fruit fly. Yeah. I'm going to have a different relationship with fruit flies going forward.
Sensitive little flowers. So this is an evolutionary imperative that we have a proportion of sensitive people in our populations, because essentially if we were all warriors, we'd all be dead. And if we were all HSPs, we'd all be dead as well. We need that mix in the population, because the high sensory processing means you're taking in more sensory information than the average bear, and you're processing it at a deeper level. So it gives you all sorts of advantages. And when we were evolving, you know, life was pretty dangerous for humans when we were evolving. There were lots of things out there that could kill you, not least the weather. And they needed people within their populations who noticed more, who were perhaps a little more cautious and would think before taking action, who had a degree of sensory sensitivity that they could, for example, might be super tasters. They could taste when the food was off. They could tell when somebody was lying because of their minute powers of observation and noticing things that other people perhaps don't. So it is really an evolutionary imperative that we have sensitive people in our population. So that alone is an extremely good, good reason to value the HSPs in the population. But there is this self-test on Elaine Aron's website, which is hsperson.com. And there's a self-test for adults, for children, and there's also a high sensation seeking test. So, gallop off there, not right now, but gallop off there and go and do the test and find out. You'll find out within 3 or 4 minutes whether you are an HSP. And Richard, I'm willing to put money on it.
Well, that I am. I might be a little bit.
But the characteristics, because there are lots of people who have environmental sensitivity, everybody has a different, we're all somewhere on that spectrum. But in order to be officially an HSP, a highly sensitive person of the genetic variety, there are 4 particular characteristics that you need to be able to tick each of those boxes. And those are sensory sensitivity. So it's about the amount of information that you take in through your 5 or your 6 or your 7 senses, depending on how many you believe that we have. And not everybody has got 20/20 vision or perfect hearing, but it's about how you process the information that comes in through those senses. Then there's also depth of processing. So it's how you manage that information. And our computers, if you like, are whirring almost all the time at a fairly intense level. There's also a characteristic I call superstimulability. A bit of a mouthful, or over-arousability, and that is the one that classically people tend to criticize highly sensitive people for, is this tendency to become overwhelmed when there's a lot going on, when there's a lot of stimulation. And that is because our brains are processing this information at a really intense level. So if there's lots of information coming in, you can reach that kind of full up, that capacity, more quickly than somebody who's a non-HSP. And then the final one of the 4 is emotional intensity. And that is that, along with all the sensory stimulus and the sensory processing depth that we have, we also have emotional processing depth. so we tend to feel everything more intensely. So you'll hear sensitive people being referred to as drama queens or fragile, or snowflake is the great one that's being bandied around at the moment, and I tend to think of it as an amazing compliment, because every snowflake is different and beautiful and unique, and snow carves mountains. It's extraordinary stuff. So those are the kind of the 4 primary characteristics that you have to be. You have to have this sensory sensitivity, you have to have this depth of processing, then there's that kind of super stimulability, the arousability, and then also the emotional intensity. So if you're even missing one of those, then you're not officially genetically an HSP, you're simply somebody with environmental sensitivity.
Okay, so I have to put the record straight, I have never been called a drama queen ever. So potentially that means that I'm not. And has there been any work to kind of link this with, other, not necessarily other psychometric tools? I know it's kind of, I guess, some linking with things like Myers-Briggs. I'm necessarily a big fan of things like that, but there's been some connection. But things like people that are highly reflective.
Yes.
So because we can again we could take any, as you say, any element of the HSP qualities and go, oh, but that person is those things, and therefore they're just a massive reflector rather than taking that time. But, so I'm kind of curious about how it's been linked up with other stuff.
Well, classically, HSPs are either INFP or INFJ, and I have been both in my time. So quite often you'll find that that is the measure of high sensitivity. That's how it appears in Myers-Briggs. And today I was just posted something actually about the now what's it called? Is it Kiersey? The Kiersey measures, and we tend to be, we all tend to sort of clump in there as well. So there are other measures that tend to put highly sensitive people in the same sort of baskets. Although, as I say, we are all different, so it's going to show up slightly differently for everybody. But you've mentioned the quality of reflectivity, and within those four traits that I just mentioned, that those are the boxes you have to tick, there are all sorts of other abilities that come in, and that's when I start talking about the superpowers. Okay,
so okay, interesting. Yeah, well, Myers-Briggs would tell me I have a preference for INFP.
Okay.
And lots of people will debate it and go, no, you're definitely E. And I go, I'm definitely not E. So I get noisy and loud in your face, but and the older I get, the more I get.
Yes. Well, that's the talk. We were talking about introspection in your group the other day, and actually 30% of HSPs are extroverts. We're not all introverts. 30% get their energy from outside themselves, from other people, which can create its own issues with that sort of over arousability, over stimulability. So they need to take care of themselves in a particular way.
Okay, so look, tell us why do you think it's a superpower? Because very often, some of those terms we're using quite a derogatory way about being a snowflake, or a bit fragile, or a drama queen. We kind of we push back on it because we don't always warm to those qualities. So why do you think it's actually more of a superpower than we first imagined?
Well, as you say, in the West, sensitivity has not been a valued commodity. In the East, it's very different. They do value people who are more reflective, who are more empathic, who are more intuitive. There's that sort of spiritual dimension, I suppose, is valued. But in the West, it's much more of the action hero that we value. The sexy, outgoing, outrageous person. But in terms of the superpowers, as you mentioned, yes, we are used to being called all sorts of names. I've got a massive page of the sort of names that we get called. But if I just want to go through some of the qualities and the characteristics. And as with everything, there's a kind of a shadow side and a light side to all of these. But in terms of the superpowers, we have this ability to absorb sensory information at this extraordinary level of processing. And that means we notice so much. Our brains never stop noticing things. We're taking in information all the time. We're scanning the horizon all the time. And we pick up on subtleties that other people miss. We spot little tiny details that other people miss about people's behaviors, about our environment. And that means that we can start looking for patterns. We're great pattern matchers. We're extremely good at coming up with solutions to problems because we notice stuff that other people don't. I was, for example, in a jury, I did jury duty, and it was completely exhausting for me, fascinating but exhausting. I was the head of the jury. They elected me the foreman because I was basically taking the best notes, but it shocked me how wrong the jury, when we were withdrawn, we withdrew into the jury room to deliberate on whether this chap was guilty or not, and he absolutely was. But it really shocked me how people had missed things, how they had misheard things, how they hadn't taken notes. They were just getting things wrong. Whereas I was able to go back through my notes and note down not just actually what people were saying, but what they looked like and what they were doing when they were saying, what their demeanor was like. And basically, it really surprised me that other people weren't able to do that. That was just something that came so naturally to me. So those powers of observation, that noticing subtle details, I think is really a really valuable trait to have in people who are also creative and imaginative, which is another characteristic, another superpower. Because when you combine that creativity and that rich imagination with noticing subtle details, then you get people who are brilliant problem solvers. You get people who are able to find solutions that other people would miss because they notice all of that stuff that's going on. Then there's also this, as I mentioned, this rich imagination and this really, really vivid inner world. I'm a great daydreamer, and you'll find most HSPs really are quite happy to retreat into their imagination and wallow around in there. So rich imagination leads to great powers of storytelling, great powers of a lot of the great artists have been HSP. A lot of songwriters and singers are HSP. I mean, and people deal with it in different ways. So you look at somebody like Adele, for example, who cries when she sings her emotional songs, and she takes herself off and doesn't tour very often because she doesn't want to have to deal with that overstimulation, that overwhelm. So she does a tour, brings out an album, and then she goes away for 2 years and recovers and has a rest. But while she's doing that, her amazing imagination is coming up with all sorts of amazing, beautiful stuff for us to listen to next time around. Then you look at somebody like Amy Winehouse, who was also clearly very sensitive, who the overwhelm got her. She was never able to fully deal with her overwhelm because she was just so much in her own world, in her own mind, in her own talent, and so overwhelmed by everything that was going on, and so led. I think she was also high sensation seeking, so she was led down paths to experience new and vivid and intense things, and she couldn't manage it. And if she'd had somebody there who'd been able to guide her and show her who she really was, I think she'd probably still be with us. So that incredible rich imagination. There's also that ability to notice things in great detail and a great, real subtle level of detail. Also, it feeds into our gut feel and our intuition, which means that most HSPs have a really strong intuition. And I think that when we have somebody who can guide us and show us who we really are, once you understand that you are this highly sensitive person and you understand what that looks like for you, and especially if you're able to then go out and seek guidance, which I did, and I now offer that guidance, you can learn so much about yourself, and you learn where your real talents and skills and superpowers lie. So I'm talking generally here, but everybody's is going to be slightly different. But that gut feel, when we learn to really deeply trust it, we can sharpen our powers of intuition, and that can serve us in any area of life. When you've got somebody who has that, that gut feel, which is grounded in observation, in noticing of detail. Because that's really what intuition is. It's our brains interpreting and our bodies interpreting the information that's coming into us. We're reflective. We do think things over. We think very deeply. People sometimes say we overthink, and that is true. So it's helpful to know the methods to get yourself out of your head sometimes and into your body. But being reflective also helps us to become good problem solvers. It means we're more likely to get things right first time as well. And I remember when I started screenwriting, hearing that you have to write 10 before you write a good one, and I thought, that's rubbish. I'm going to do my homework and then I'm going to write a good one to start with. And the first screenplay I ever wrote is still the one that has got the most options, and that's the one that's a finalist in this competition. So we put a lot of thought into what we're doing. I'm being a high sensation seeker. I'm also I'm also quite impulsive, so I have a little bit of a battle going on between those two as a sensitive upstart. We also, this intensity of emotion means that we have these deep, passionate interests in things, in people, in what we're doing. And that leads to a really strong value set and a really strong appreciation for the things that we like, for the things that we love, for the things that we enjoy doing. So HSPs tend to be really committed to what they're doing, to have this really firm values foundation, which I think makes for good people. When you're passionate about what you do, about the people that you love, and you have a really strong value set, that makes you a valuable human being. Another thing I think that is a superpower and that is common to a lot of HSPs is what I experienced, this search for meaning, this understanding that there is something more out there, and this desire to find out what that more is. And I think it comes down to wanting to live the best life we can, wanting to live a life that matters. So you get these people who have strong value sets, who are really, living with conviction and doing something. When they find what they're passionate about, they can make a massive difference in the world because they're so committed to it. So what else have we got? We've got, well, I think that's probably quite a long list already. So do you want to chime in at this point?
Yeah, I think basically HSPs sound like they're real smarty pants.
Yeah, they are. We are smarty pants.
I would want to be one.
Exactly. It's their superpowers. Oh my goodness, I look like I've been boiled with these lights here.
It's the excitement. It happens often.
Yeah, I look like I've been simmering gently for several hours.
Yeah. So I'm interested in just a kind of a bit off track, but so although you say it's genetic, how much of it can be learned and modeled within the environment and the culture that we're in? So if it's valued much more in Eastern world and Eastern philosophy, does that mean we find there are more people that are, HSPs there, or do we think that actually if it's in our environment, then people will learn to pick up on it and observe it and build more of those qualities and traits?
The genetic tendency towards being HSP or not, you either are or you're not, and that tends to be a fairly stable 15 to 20% of the population. But don't forget, we also have this sensitivity spectrum, environmental sensitivity, and we're all on there somewhere. And you're only HSP if you tick those 4 boxes that I mentioned at the beginning. You can tick 3 and still have a lot of these traits and characteristics. You're just not likely to have them in all 4 areas. So when I'm talking about, the HSP superpowers, other people can have these superpowers as well. You get non-HSPs who are highly intuitive, who notice things, who observe a lot. But to have all of those 4 boxes, that is the genetic variant of it.
Gotcha.
So in the East, they do value that kind of reflection. They do value this focus on detail and the beautiful aspect of things, because that's another thing, is that HSPs tend to be really moved by beauty. And you get a lot of that in the East, that lovely attention to detail. I spent the month of April in Bali, and it's just so joyous for me to be around people who take such pleasure in making ordinary things beautiful. And that I think is very Eastern characteristic, but gradually, there are enough of us now in the West who are starting to really value and talk about these characteristics that I think it's becoming more normal, more acceptable to be sensitive.
I just want to check and see if there are what questions are coming in. So there is one about Kelly asked about how different it is to empaths.
Right. Actually, that's one of the superpowers I missed out, and it's one of the most important ones, is that I tend to talk about being empathic rather than an empath, because I think empaths are so highly tuned into other people that it's a characteristic that can be difficult to control. Whereas a lot of HSPs have this ability to, because of what we notice, because of what we're processing, because we have this depth of emotional processing as well, and this vivid imagination, those things combine to make it easier for us to step into somebody else's shoes. And empathy is about really vividly imagining what that person is going through. And when we have, as I say, those powers of subtle powers of observation, or deep powers of subtle observation, when we are interested and connected with somebody, and when we have the vivid imagination that allows us to imagine what they're feeling, that creates this empathy. And it's a massive part of our superpower, is to be able to understand to a degree what other people are going through. And the key for us, and what I think turns it from, you know, being a situation where you're an empath, where you can't help it and you're almost a slave to that empathy, and the superpower, the empathic superpower of the HSP, what makes it one and not the other is the ability, I believe, to keep one foot in our world. So if we want to have empathy for somebody in a way that is really that has value, that enables us to help them, we have to be able to stay grounded in our world while we have one foot in theirs. So that is something that we can learn. That's something I teach people how to do. And actually, as in therapy training, that's what you're taught how to do, is really how to connect with your client, with your patient, while not losing yourself in their world. And that it's really important to be able to do that. So that is definitely a skill.
So a component of HSP.
Yeah. So it's yes, it's one of the key superpowers. I managed to miss that out. So well prodded.
Kelly said Kelly's done the test, and hopefully not whilst we were on this, because it means she wasn't concentrating for a moment.
Oh, good.
It says she's done it, and it says she got 14. So it
14.
looks like she's an HSP.
Yes, so she's on the sane and moderate end of HSP. Yeah. So that doesn't surprise me at all, actually, because she's really pragmatic, but she's also a sensitive person who connects and has empathy. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
I actually think our dog is. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
You'll know. HSP. He's an HSD.
Yeah. An HSD. Exactly.
So I'm pretty sure, because I think he's super sensitive to things.
Well, just on the point of empathy, actually, I mean, animals can have, you know, I believe animals can have empathy as well. But one of the advantages of being empathic is that we can also tell when people are lying, as well as, you know, connect to their pain and their joy. So that is one of the real superpowers, and that was incredibly useful when we were evolving, because if you were parleying with the next tribe, you know, you wanted to have someone in the room who could observe and let you know whether those people were telling the truth or not, whether they were trustworthy or not. So that is a really important part of the superpower that empathy brings us.
Okay, that would be useful in lots of walks of life, wouldn't it?
It is, yeah.
So at the very start, you said that you're a sensitive upstart. What does that mean?
Well, that's as I mentioned, this other quality. So when I was first, I was about to say diagnosed. That's not quite the right word for it. But when it was pointed out to me while I was training, one of my tutors said after a particular intervention, I'm sure Caroline won't mind us saying that she's a textbook example of an HSP. And I said, what's an HSP? And she said, a highly sensitive person. And my little judgment monkey just went, oh, highly sensitive person. You know, I just thought, oh, don't be ridiculous. And then it was the second time that somebody mentioned that I was an HSP. I thought, okay, this sounds like a thing, you know, so I need to look this up. And that's when I really started to find out more about it and realize that, yes, I am. But I'm not textbook, because quite often one of the characteristics of sensitivity is caution. You know, is this reflection, and quite often long periods of deep reflection before you take action, reflect before you act. And sometimes there's a risk aversity that comes with it. And I am not risk averse at all. I mean, I've always been almost the opposite, in fact. You know, I would say that my impulsiveness is moderated by my sensitivity, makes me a bit more reflective, but I have jumped into things, into big adventures all of my life. You know, I rode a motorbike well before I got my driving license to drive a car. And my idea of a great time is throwing myself off a boat into several thousand feet of water. So, you know, I wasn't a classic HSP. And when I delved further into it, there was a mention on in Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person, which is the Bible for us. There was a mention about the fact that some 30% of HSPs have this additional characteristic, that they are high sensation seekers, HSS. And that's when it all came together for me. It was like, there we go. Okay. And I think it's a bit of a mouthful to call them high sensation seeking, highly sensitive person. So I thought, right, I'm going to come up with a term for this, because it doesn't exist. The people exist, but the human category is kind of not really out there. So I thought, right, I'm going to call us, and the term I came up with after lots of reflection and toing and froing is sensitive upstart. And some people, you know, it polarizes people, that term, but basically it describes the approximately 6% of the population, 30% of HSPs, who have both high sensitivity and who are also high sensation seekers. And high sensation seekers have this constant need for new, varied and intense experiences. So you kind of put that together with the sensitivity angle, with all of the superpowers that come through with that, and you know, it's quite a handful. It's a really interesting thing to be, and I absolutely love hanging out with other sensitive upstarts because I think they are dynamic people who are capable of changing the world if they are able to manage themselves and understand and embrace the characteristics that they have. Then they can start to design the life that's going to work for them, rather than constantly having these, you know, these deep fascinations I mentioned and then moving on to something else. You can actually design a life that includes those fascinations within it, and or a career or a job or a business that includes that constant ability for self-renewal, for new experiences, for intense and varied experiences. So that's a sensitive upstart.
Okay, so is there much study around entrepreneurs and highly sensitive people, but specifically the sensitive upstart piece, because it feels like a real entrepreneurial trait?
Yes, and actually lots of sensitive people become entrepreneurs because working for other people in a large office environment can be intolerable. You know, it really starts to become too overwhelming, too hyperstimulating, and quite a lot of the work that I'm going to be doing in future is working with corporates to identify, you know, to audit their environment, their working practices, their leadership style, their communication style, because I think that if you can make a business that is a good place to work for an HSP, for a highly sensitive person, it's going to be a great place to work for everybody. So that's kind of one of the strings of business that I'm going to be going down at some point. But a lot of HSPs do become entrepreneurs also because of the passionate attachment to wanting to live a life that matters, you know, wanting to do that something more for other people. And I haven't yet done the research into sensitive upstarts. It just doesn't exist, that research. But I am going to be doing it to find out, because I bet that there's a much higher percentage of the entrepreneurial population who are sensitive upstarts than the 6% in the general population at large. I'm willing to put lots of money on that one.
Yeah, I reckon. Come back and tell us as soon as you've done the research.
I will do. I'll be setting up a Facebook group actually for sensitive upstarts in the near future. So, you know, pile on in everyone who relates to this.
Yeah, cool. So as soon as that's up and running, you need to pop the link in and make sure.
Yes, I will do. Yeah.
So given that HSPs we know are prone to some overwhelm, and we talked about, you know, corporates embracing this, isn't it something that organizations need to be wary of if we start encouraging organizations and the bigger corporates to go and, you know, recruit these highly sensitive people? Isn't that, I think, they spend all their time kind of mollycoddling them and wrapping them in cotton wool and kind of, you know, oh, come in a bit, you have a lie-in because you must be exhausted because you're so sensitive.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Businesses don't need to mollycoddle anybody. So HSP, sensitive people, are just as, you know, just as resilient, just as able to manage as others. In fact, there was an interesting piece of research that I was reading about the other day where they tested a lot of IT people working in the IT department, and they found out that the people who contributed the most in terms of value, working value, were the HSPs, but they were also by far the most stressed. So HSPs are able to work, to continue functioning while managing high levels of stress themselves. I launched a survey on Friday, actually, which is looking exactly at that topic, because what I want to do is to establish whether there's a link between high sensitivity and burnout rates. That hasn't been done either, that research. So that's something I launched on Friday, and I think I sent the link through to Kelly on that earlier. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of that. But no, businesses don't need to mollycoddle anybody, but there's a massive benefit to them in making their environments, making them, you know, good employers, and making their environments great places to work.
Because what does that mean? When you say good environments, what does that mean?
Well, if I just say to you that the average open plan office is pretty much hell for HSPs, simply because of the sheer volume of distraction that is going on all the time. And because we take so much in, we notice everything on a sensory level. You know, bright lights are going to be, I have problems with bright lights directly in my eyes. I have real issues with noise. If there's a big noise going on around me, I can't focus, I can't concentrate. It's really difficult for me to have a meeting with somebody if there's a drill outside or a siren going by. So tuning out noise for me is a major issue, and you can't tune it out in an open plan environment. You know, there are people on phones all around you, there are photocopiers going off, there are printers whirring into action, there's people fidgeting, you know, there's a constant noise. And if you have a noise sensitivity, as I do, I find that incredibly difficult. People say, well, why don't you just put on headphones? Because that's another noise. You know, I'd have to have noise cancelling headphones, because I can't work with music on around me. Now, some HSPs can, but I can't. So just from a purely, you know, sensory level, the average open plan office is really overwhelming. There's traffic going on all around you all the time. And also, one of the things that we massively value, HSPs, is the ability to go off on your own and just, you know, just hide away. And the average HSP knows the location of every toilet on every floor in every building, because that is quite often the place that you retreat to when it all gets a little bit just too much and you just need some peace and quiet. Now, obviously, it's not a particularly comfortable environment to go and to get your peace and quiet in. So if companies have you know, pods on each floor, or little rooms that you can book for 15 minutes that you can just go and sit in the dark somewhere and be quiet, that can really massively help HSPs to deal with their stress levels and to actually improve their productivity and their health and their well-being. It's not a very difficult thing for a business to do. It doesn't require a lot of space. It doesn't require a lot of money, but it would make a significant difference. You know, I got really used to, when I'm working with a client, making sure that there are 60-minute rooms and things like that I can book at least once or twice a day to go and get that little bit of peace and quiet that helps me to focus and helps me to be productive and helps me not to burn out. So it's not about mollycoddling, it's just about creating a less stimulating environment so that people can actually have some peace and quiet to get on with what they do well.
We've tipped that way, though, haven't we? Organizations are going for this whole kind of high energy, high connectivity, the kind of hubs. Let's create more energy, let's create more interaction, let's have kind of pool tables and dartboards and bright colors. And so we've kind of gone that way. We've kind of, organizations are working hard, spending millions of pounds to build centers like that.
To build more distraction into the environment. And now we've gone too far, because 15 to 20% of the people who walk through those doors in the morning will find that environment probably, you know, enjoyable to an extent, but very quickly it becomes over arousing, it becomes hyper stimulating, and you just need to be able to withdraw and find quiet space in which to concentrate and do your work.
I'm definitely now, whenever I go into, if I go into any public toilet and see people hanging around, I'm definitely going to ask them if they're HSP. Is there a handshake we need to learn? Is there like a special handshake where we can just kind of, is there a look or a badge or something?
Yeah, you have to look upside down. No.
I don't think I want to start doing that in the public toilets. That's going to create a whole raft of problems. What I was thinking
we'll make you a badge, Richard. But the thing is that what we don't want to be doing here is getting businesses stigmatizing their sensitive employees. I want them to value them. I want them to understand that a significant percentage of their working population, you know, is likely to be hyperstimulated by their environment. So this is just normal for them. You know, it's not a disorder. Sensory processing sensitivity is not the same as sensory processing disorder. This is, as I say, an evolutionary advantage that we have these people. They have amazing superpowers. They are brilliant assets for businesses, because they're also they make extremely good leaders if they've got people who are good at doing their own thing. If they've got people who need micromanaging, they're not such great managers, because they tend to get very involved and really want to make everything better. But where you've got a team that is really good at what they do, put an HSP as the manager and it becomes even better. You know, it makes a great team. So you want to be able to create that environment, create those flexible working practices. I mean, 2 days working from home, for example, for an HSP would be heaven, because they would really value the business, they really value their employer for giving them that flexibility. And because, don't get me started on commuting, you know, for the average HSP, standing on a train for an hour twice a day, dealing with tubes in central London, for example, is a nightmare. an absolute nightmare. So you arrive at work hopelessly overstimulated, or you've zoned out to the point where you're practically comatose, in order to be able to deal with that. So what we don't want businesses to do is to stigmatize highly sensitive people. We want them to value them, to consider them as normal part of their employee population, and to create environments that work for sensitive people, but therefore work beautifully for everybody. Because I'm sure that, you know, non-HSPs as well would value occasionally having a nice, you know, dim, quiet space where they can go and spend 15 minutes just being quiet or meditating or having a phone call or whatever it is. You know, that's going to be valuable for everybody.
And I was just thinking that whilst I am fairly confident that I am HSP, I think based on what you've said, I'm just wondering how I coped with kind of being in the theatre, which was maybe I just ring-fenced it for that time of my life. Maybe it just became a kind of back to the whole introversion piece, I guess, of where it becomes so exhausting. Yeah. And I would whacked after a 3-hour show, and 2 show days were kind of just nearly killed me. But in an environment that is massively overwhelming, sensory overload for that entire time, with just people in your faces.
Yeah, you learn coping strategies. You know, you learn how to look after yourself. You learn to conserve your energy. I would bet that you weren't partying all day on those days. You know,
I didn't party ever because I just didn't have enough. I didn't have enough interest in it.
That's
but I was so kind of felt like the batteries were depleted.
Yeah, but you also, it helps that you love what you do. You know, you don't notice HSPs falling over, sensitive people falling over all the time. They take it to a point where actually they can't help but fall over. And you obviously haven't quite reached that point, but you're working hard to conserve your energy so that you could go out and do that thing that presumably you love doing, that you were passionate about. Which, you know, mega impressed, fan worship here, mega impressed.
Well, thank you. So look, we need to, I just realized time, and that's also it's fascinating, and we could kind of stay here. So tell us a bit more about, so what's your vision for the future? What's next, and how can people from this tribe get involved and help you and learn more and support you?
Fantastic. Well, my vision is really to get the positive word out on sensitivity, because so much of what is out there now is about the downside. It's about the negative. You know, I remember the first time I was ever called a snowflake was actually in a meeting at work. And ever since then, I've claimed it. I've gone, yeah, I am that snowflake. It's a beautiful thing, a snowflake. It's completely unique. It's amazing, and it calms mountains. So what I want to do is to be the champion. And there are several of us around, actually, to join forces with other people who will champion sensitivity as a superpower, and who will encourage parents to really get to understand their children. Because with 1 in 5 having this genetic characteristic, most people in this world are going to be knowing somebody, loving somebody, parenting somebody, managing somebody, being managed by somebody who is highly sensitive. So raising this awareness, not just among HSPs, but amongst others, that this is a normal characteristic, that these are normal people, but they're really valuable. You know, they have a lot to offer, and not to be hypercritical of people who show emotion, of people who need to go off by themselves and recover after they've, you know, done something. And the thing is that we get hyperstimulated by good stuff as well as by the bad stuff. So, you know, I need to recover. If I've been to a good party, I'll need to go off and be by myself, or leave the party at a point where, you know, I can still manage to look after myself. So just, I think it's about developing awareness, self-awareness for HSPs, and awareness and understanding and compassion amongst the population at large, that this is a really valuable characteristic, that this is normal, this exists in a large number of people. And there's this fantastic thing called vantage sensitivity, which they've done some, you know, a lot of research into. And vantage sensitivity shows that when highly sensitive people receive positive interventions, even really minute, subtle positive interventions in terms of focused attention, in terms of a better environment, in terms of somebody noticing and praising something that they're doing, their performance skyrockets, much more actually than a non-HSP who is receiving those same interventions. So when, you know, if the world at large can, even on a small level, appreciate HSPs for who they are, notice who they are, notice what contribution they're making, and try to make life a little bit more comfortable for everybody, then highly sensitive people, their performance improves radically. So it's in all of our interests that this awareness happens, that we do raise this awareness, and that we do change this notion that to be sensitive is something negative, is something that undesirable. So that's my mission, really. So
what can people do to get on board, get involved?
Keep in touch with what I'm doing, definitely, because I'm relatively near the beginning of this journey. Go please and take my survey. Because the more critical mass I've got of that, the better.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If you want to know more, then please like my Facebook page, which is Caroline Ferguson Mindset Trainer, because I'll be publishing all sorts of useful tips on that. I'll be starting to do more Facebook Lives around the topic of sensitivity, how we manage it in our children, how we manage it at work, how we manage ourselves. And also, I'll be setting up the Sensitive Upstarts group. So if you think that you might be an HSP and HSS and you'd like to be part of that community, I think amazing things are going to happen when those people get together and they find that there are other people like them. So that's coming up as well. But generally, yeah, just keep in touch with me on Facebook. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask. If you've got anything you want help with working on, please do come and have a chat with me. But I'll be also doing a TEDx talk about this at the end of November for the TEDx Drapanos women in Crete at the end of November. So it's going to gather momentum. This movement.
It's all happening. I'm just grateful that you've given us some time this evening, folks. You can hear it's pretty easy to contact Caroline and track her down. She's also in the BTFI group. So if you're in the BTFI group, easy to connect with her. If you're watching this and you're not in the BTFI group, then why not? We'll pop the link for that too. So come and hang out with a tribe of thought leaders and movers and shakers, and it's a good group to be a part of. So come and join if you're not in it already. If you think that you have friends that will appreciate hearing this and learn more about HSPs, then of course share the live tonight. That would be good too. Any questions that I haven't picked up, because I know there are a couple in here, then we will pick them up. I'll have a stab, and certainly Caroline will be tagged, so you can ask Caroline the question too. So Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. It's absolutely fascinating. I really knew nothing before tonight, and I'm so glad we had this. I feel like I've learned lots, some great insight, and kind of just joining some dots up for me too.
Good, and I hope you're going to post your score in your group. Let us know.
Yeah, I'm going to go and do it now. I'm going to sit downstairs with a cup of tea.
It'll literally take you 2 minutes. Yeah.
I'm exhausted. I feel completely overwhelmed from this. So I'm going to go and sit downstairs now in a dark room with a cup of tea and my laptop, turning the screen brightness down.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, letting me rabbit on. I could talk about this, as you can probably tell, all day. So
great. Well, we want people on here that are passionate about their things. So it would be odd if you had nothing to say and we were done in 10 minutes.
Okay, well,
so I'm appreciative. Thank you. So people, good night and goodbye and God bless from us and from Harry. I've just named him. Kelly doesn't know that, but I just called him Harry the Hand.
Harry the Hand.
I got that. That is pure creativity, people. If you want to know how I did that, I'm not sharing it with you. But good night from Harry. Next Monday, I won't be on because I'm traveling to Tavistock. So I'm going to be in the car heading down there to speak at a conference on Tuesday, but we are doing a very special Facebook Live on Wednesday night at 6 o'clock, World Mental Health Day. I'm going to do a whole Facebook Live all about anxiety, what it is, what it isn't, different types of anxiety, and most importantly, how we can move through it. Got some free things to give away, so come and join. And for that, but for now, Caroline, again, thank you. Folks, thank you for being a part of it. Look after yourselves and each other. Lots of love. See you soon.
Okay, good night.
Take care. Bye. See you. Bye.